Hi everyone. I hope you're having a great week so far. Today I'll be doing a kind of a brief review and overview of theme-based planning and theme-based units and why I love them, why I find them supportive for students and teachers. And I'll link some of my previous articles on Substack that talk a little bit more about some of the different elements. But of course, if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. So what is a theme-based unit? For me personally, a theme-based unit is a multidisciplinary unit. And by multidisciplinary, I don't necessarily mean you have to collaborate with all of the different content teachers in your school. Sometimes it's just gathering some different materials that create those connections between contents. But a multidisciplinary unit in that regard that uses a central theme, what I call an anchor theme, as the umbrella for the unit, for the material in the unit, for the language that you'll be expressing in the unit, for the project, because for me a theme-based unit is a project-based unit. For the essential questions, because a theme-based unit for me always has essential questions that are broad, big questions that I'm asking students to explore as we go through this unit. That a theme-based unit for me also connects to students' lives and themselves and their background knowledge. It's why I spent so much time talking about building background knowledge, because I find it really important. And it also has about what I use as 7 to 9, although I've seen more like 10 to 15. But for me, 7 to 9 essential vocabulary words, which I call anchor vocabulary, that help me to express that theme, and in this case help your students express that theme. So there's some of the bigger words, some maybe more conceptual words, or really central to your anchor theme that students would need to use in order to talk about that anchor theme. And this isn't necessarily a requirement, but I personally do tend to use more conceptual anchor themes like identity, evolution, revolution, conflict. Those tend to be more of my anchor themes, although it may be more appropriate, particularly if you have newcomers, you use a more concrete anchor theme like family or school. And I'm sure community. But even some of those, what I would consider concrete anchor themes, could still be very conceptual and complex topics that you explore with students. So that's kind of the what. And the why for me, and from what I've read, and I'll link some sources below that also express this. Why use anchor themes? Well, really for all students, but particularly for language learners and for culturally and linguistically diverse learners, theme-based units provide those connections where students may not have them. And they promote connections, obviously, to their lives. But when we plan for those connections to other content, when we plan for the connections to the language that they need to be able to use to express the content that we're talking about in a theme-based unit, we're giving students a kind of a leg up. I talk about that a lot because what we want to be able to do is bring students up to those bigger ideas and that higher order thinking, rather than simplifying ideas and bringing it down to students. So students may have needs, and they need a lot of support in a lot of our schools. But if we can provide the environment to bring them up to those bigger ideas, to that more conceptual thinking, to those bigger questions, it's more supportive for our students. Because I worked with older English language learners, I saw very quickly where they needed that support, because they had a certain, they were older, so they had a certain background, and I needed to get them quickly to those bigger ideas, because they weren't young little kids. They were 16, 17, sometimes 18 years old. I wanted them to be able to express some of those bigger ideas that I knew they had in them. They just needed the language and the questions for me to ask them in order to support some of those more mature thoughts and thinking that they had, but were sort of missing the language for it. So, and for teachers, I personally think that theme-based planning is a great way to organize your mind. It's a great way to organize your content. And it's a great way to really be explicit about why it is you're teaching what you're teaching, not just for your students, but also for yourself. It forces me, and when I'm working with teachers, it forces them to really look at, well, why am I choosing this material, aside from I have to teach it? What are the connections I can find around it? And many teachers have options of what they can teach, and that's even more reason to really look at why you're teaching what you're teaching, and how you're going to get students to convey ideas about what you're teaching, and how they're going to express that in a final project, even if you have to use a test, some multiple choice test. I think there are ways in which you can take pieces of theme-based planning into your practice, even doing a little mini project. Maybe it's not the whole end thing, and incorporate that into your classroom. So these are just some basics. I'll talk about it in the article below, and then later this week I will talk more about some specific examples and specific how-to, and I think that's what I'm going to be doing for the next couple of weeks, just to give you some ideas of what this can look like, and also some sample units, most of which, because I'm a humanities teacher, are humanities, but I'm going to gather hopefully some science, math curriculum to share with you, some theme-based units. So I hope you loved today's post. Of course, if you have questions, reach out, and I'll see you soon.